Welcome to the PHNX Coyotes podcast, brought to you by the one and only DraftKings Sportsbook app, America's #1 sportsbook app. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review. I'm Leah Merrill here with Craig Morgan, who is back from his vacation, and Steve Peters is somewhere in the air. So we've brought in the other Peters, Chris Peters, to make his return to the PHNX Coyotes podcast. Welcome to the show, NHL Draft and Prospects analyst Chris Peters. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Leah, thanks for having me on. Craig, good to be with you guys as well. Yeah, it's that time of year, so I guess this is where I start making the rounds and talking about the draft, and we'll see if I contradict myself in all these interviews I've been doing lately. But I'll try and give you guys the best one.
All right, let's clear up some important business first of all. Which offshore account should we send the wire transfer?
I do think the Cayman Islands is where I'd like to
it's hard to keep
have
track
that sent to. Yeah, I know. If I did have offshore accounts, I don't think I'd be chasing prospects in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. I just don't think that's something that I would do. Although it is what I love to do, so maybe it'd be a lot easier if I had offshore accounts. Then I could go to Moose Jaw on a whim if I wanted to. So we got to work that out. I gotta. I'm not a good money guy. I'm not good at math either. So
me either.
Good company.
Yeah.
That's
the way it goes.
All right. So if I remember correctly, you were not in Buffalo for the Combine, but you probably talked to a million people nonetheless. You were the one that gave me the actual measurement on Logan Cooley, who is apparently up to 5 feet 10.5 now, not quite 5'11" as he thought. But did you have any major takeaways from the Combine?
Not a ton that I didn't already anticipate. Like, Cutter Gaucher was a rock star at that event. I've thought long for months that he's one of the best, if not the best pure athlete in this draft. So it's never surprising to see the national team development program guys do very well at that event. So he did well. Cooley did well. Frank Nazar did exceptionally well. So all guys from that U.S. program. Joakim Kemell actually was another Combine darling. Not a big guy, but just really a solid player overall. And I really liked what he was able to accomplish. Interestingly enough, speaking of measurements, we talked about Logan Cooley. Okay, so he was just shy of 5'11", and it's amazing how much that 5'10" versus 5'11" matters, because 5'11" is like, well, he's almost 6 feet tall. So that makes it kind of interesting. But Kemell, who we've thought was 5'11" all along, measured at the Combine at about 5'9.5", which I've seen him in person. I've never thought him to be one of the smaller, players, but that was what he measured at the Combine. So that was another thing where it's like, oh, okay, all right, interesting. But as far as everything else, I think we heard very positive reviews on a number of players from their interviews. Gaucher, again, not just a physical presence and athletic presence, but interviewed exceptionally well. Most teams see him as a center as opposed to a wing, which significantly alters his draft status. He played a lot of center this year. He's a natural center. So that's given a lot of teams a lot of excitement about him. And other players have just interviewed well. I haven't heard anybody tanking an interview. I'm sure that there are a few out there where they interviewed poorly, but if it hasn't gotten across my desk yet. So it's a valuable event. And I think the interviews are probably far more important than the physical testing. And then really, I think one of the most underrated to the outside world portions of the Combine is the medical testing and the physiological testing the players go through behind closed doors. We don't get that information, but the teams do. The players have that information released, and that can have a significant impact on players. Whether it's like, okay, well, we think he's going to be able to tack on this much strength. We think his frame can support this much. There have been heart conditions that have been found at the Combine as well. So it's a hugely important piece of the Combine puzzle that wasn't there for the last 2 years. So very important piece. I think a lot of teams were very excited to be back in Buffalo and able to contribute or participate rather in that Combine.
With that in mind, did anybody significantly impact their stock in Buffalo positively or negatively? Is it even possible for a player to impact their stock that much at the Combine?
It's certainly possible. Certainly possible for, for especially in the interview phase. I've certainly heard of players that just absolutely failed in their their interview process, and it just that they left teams concerned about them. I would say the top. This is interesting for me. Maybe not. It's really in the weeds, but Topias Leinonen, the top Finnish goaltender, the top European goaltender, is ranked by Central Scouting, weighed in at 233 pounds, which is a large, as a goaltender, that can be an issue. You want big goalies, right? You don't want to be too big. The thing about it is I've watched him live, and I don't see anything where like a heavier weight holds him back. But that is definitely it's something that stood out to me as I'm looking like who are the tallest, who are the shortest, who are the lightest, who are the heaviest. And, he was by far the heaviest of the players. And like I said, he doesn't look it in the net. He doesn't look like it holds him back. But in a year where goalies are already kind of scarce, one of the top guys coming in and saying, oh, I don't know, can he play? He's going to have to lose some weight. He's going to have to, work on a couple other things. That's something that teams may not want to have to deal with. So I found that interesting as well. I don't think did it impact his draft stock significantly? Probably not. He's still probably a second, third, maybe fourth round draft prospect anyway. So it's not exactly like, we're talking about a guy that falls out of the first round or anything like that.
Right. And with goaltenders, he's got like 6 or 7 years to take care of it anyway.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, for sure.
Go ahead.
So Chris, we want to ask you, because for months there was kind of the consensus number one, but it seems like lately there's been some rumblings. Maybe Shane Wright isn't going to be the number one overall pick. So do you think personally that Shane Wright is still going number one? And the second part to that question is, could Juraj Slafkovský jump to number one?
I believe that he'll go number one. He would not be my pick at number one. That's the way that I would say it. I believe that there is enough of a consensus out there that suggests, this guy is good enough to be a good two-way center at the NHL level. He's a guy that can impact your team in a positive manner. Just because we say, just because somebody like me says Shane Wright's not the number one prospect doesn't really change what the Montreal Canadiens are going to do. If nothing else, it just gets Canadiens fans really mad at me because they would love nothing more than to have a no doubt first overall. But I know you guys have had Corey Pronman on before. He had Slafkovský at 1. I'm going to have Logan Cooley at 1. That's the kind of debate that we're talking about. So I had Cooley 1 at the midterm, and I'll just to walk you guys through that as I will the readers when my rankings come out on Friday. The biggest thing is all of the reasons that I had Logan Cooley number 1 at the midterm didn't materially change over the course of the second half of the season. He's still the most dynamic player in the draft. He's still the most, skilled, one of the fastest, probably one of the top 2 or 3 fastest players in this draft. Incredibly competitive, does not get enough credit for how good of a defensive forward he is, at least in the public realm. I know teams feel very strongly about his ability to play a two-way style. The only difference between him and Shane Wright at this point is, I think, a matter of inches in size. And I think, Wright is the physically stronger player at this point, but Cooley is by far the more explosive player. And so when I'm picking first overall, I want to see a guy that's going to be a star. I think Shane Wright, while I don't feel like he is going to be a superstar talent, he is going to be a star for whatever team he plays for, a fan favorite, a guy that is a significant impact player on his team. I think Logan Cooley could be a superstar if everything goes right. And that's a big risk. You're taking a risk on ceiling with those players. And that's why, for me, of the players in this draft, Shane Wright does not have the most upside. I don't think he's going to get a ton better than where he is right now, because we haven't seen that progression that we've seen in other players. I will say none of these picks are without risk. But I would say if you're talking Cooley, Slafkovský, Wright, it is very tight for me personally between, among those 3 players. You could pick any one of them at number 1, and I will not criticize you for doing so. I think they all make sense. My personal preference is Logan Cooley's the best player in this draft. But if I'm Kent Hughes and I'm the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens and I have to make this pick in front of my home crowd and I go, and I make this risky pick that if it doesn't work out, I mean, maybe I won't be a GM for very long. So that's
American too.
An American or a Slovakian for that matter.
Yeah.
Especially when they've wanted centers for so long, and it's like, well, you guys have had centers. Philip Deneau is a pretty good center, and he's not there anymore. I mean, like they've had pretty decent centers. Obviously, a lot of people gun shy still because Jesperi Kotkaniemi, they drafted him because he was a center. He's not going to be a center in the NHL. It's just the way it is. And obviously he's not going to be played for the Montreal Canadiens anymore because he's already gone. Well, but yeah, so that's just kind of where it's such a crazy thing to do. But when you're picking a number one, the pressure is so high to go with the one that people expect you to pick.
Let's stick with Cooley for a little bit longer because I think you read that he had a terrific combine as well, tested well in a number of areas. So let's talk about that and how that might impact thinking on him. But I also want the counter. We talked about his height. He's 5 feet 10.5. How much of a concern is that as a number one center in the NHL?
Well, I would hope that we take lessons from Braden Point because I think that Braden Point is probably one of the most direct comparable players to Logan Cooley. Point maybe was a bit more productive in his draft season overall in the WHL. It's a little bit of a different situation. But, I'd say that I have never once looked at Logan Cooley at any point in this draft and said he's too small to play center. Because he is so competitive and so quick and thinks the game at such a fast pace that's the kind of guy that I can see driving a top line if need be. He's not a surefire number one center, I think, but I have no doubt in my mind he'll be no worse than a number two center in the league. And that's all on him to just continue to progress at the rate that he's progressed so far and stay on that development arc and really push himself in college. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if his numbers, weren't earth-shattering next season in his first year of college hockey. But I watched him play against college teams this year, and he was consistently the best forward on the ice, regardless of who he was playing against. And that included a lot of guys that were much older and some guys that were drafted in the first round. Every time I saw him go against the colleges, I thought he really raised his game. So I have very little concern about his ability to play center. And he's a guy that, obviously I've been very high on for a long time, but I still feel like, of the three guys that we're talking about at number one, that star potential exists with him in such a way that I just don't see it as much. I see it a little more with Slafkovsky too than Wright. So, I mean, that's what we're kind of talking about. But in the end, I just think Logan Cooley has every tool that you could possibly want aside from being 6'1". I mean, really. And if that's the only thing that's holding him back, that's not a good enough reason to not take him.
Have you heard anything, coming out from teams, whether there's any rumblings about people potentially wanting to move up in the draft? And obviously, the Coyotes are an example of a team that they have so many picks in that, end of first round, beginning of second round. Like, have you heard anything like that of teams wanting to move?
I think there's definitely a number of teams that, if given the right package, would want to move up. And I think it's, the value on this year's draft is all over the maps, so I do think that there are some teams that would be very reluctant to trade him away. But, you think we've heard through the media mostly that number 2 is in play for New Jersey, and the Senators pick in the top 10 also potentially in play. And so if those are those are two prime locations to get a massive impact prospect. If you get that number 2 pick, and if I'm New Jersey, I want to make sure that whatever package is coming my way, it's got to either be a roster player or it's got to be something that keeps me in the top 10 of the draft. I wouldn't want to move too far out of that, because I still think they need to continue to grow their prospect pool, which they've done a fantastic job of these last couple of years. But yeah, so I would say that those are two of the picks where you say, oh, there's potential there. I think if you are the Coyotes, obviously this is not a pick you move. Unless somebody comes at you with a young roster player or a young prospect that's kind of proven a little bit. And then you have to make that decision based on who the first 2 picks are. I don't think you'd want to make that trade until you already know what's available to you. So yeah, but I think there are going to be some teams that are aggressive. I think there are going to be roster players in play for teams to get into the upper ranges of this draft. But if you're looking to just simply get into the first round, I don't think there's enough value later in the first round to just, compile too many assets to try to get there. I think if you're going to go, you got to go in that top 15 range to get somebody that's going to make a massive impact.
Sticking with that thought, Chris, scouts like to separate drafts into groups. There's an elite group. There's that second group. I don't know how deep each of those goes. And then when does it fall off to the point where it's just like a crapshoot, depending on various teams' evaluations, which can vary widely?
Yeah, I think the crapshoot phase begins somewhere in the 20 to 22 range of this draft, and it goes all the way. I don't see a ton of separation between the guys that'll go 22 and the guys that'll go 62. There is separation, and it just kind of all depends on guys that I'm particularly fond of. That, I'm sure there will be plenty of them available in the 3rd and 4th round, even just because this draft is all over the map. But, I think we talked a lot about those top 3 guys. I think they are in a class all their own. I think they're very tightly bunched together as the top 3. The next one comes in and it's about, maybe that 4 to 16, really probably closer 4 to like 12 in that range, where you say, okay, well, that's my next tier of players where I feel like I'm going to still get an impact prospect. I'm going to get a guy that I think will be one of the top prospects in my current prospect pool. And it'll be a player that, has, pretty significant NHL upside in general. And then after that, really that next range, I think, you're kind of looking in that 16 to 22 range where you say, okay, there's a lot. If we get one of those guys in that range, that's another group where we've got an NHL prospect. And then after that, you're saying, okay, well, we're looking for, are we going to find a star in that range? Are we going to find a depth player in that range? It's all coming down to preference. You've also got this year's draft is so wacky because there are teams with multiple first round picks, including the Coyotes, including a number of other teams that will, that can change the entire dynamic of a first round. So it's always interesting to see when that happens because as you build your boards, you're trying to predict where all of that is going to be. And that's one of the toughest jobs that scouts have, is not only predicting what these players are going to look like, but when they're going to be available, which is how boards end up getting made often.
I want to get to this comment from AJ and Chris. AJ is one of the hosts on DNVR Avalanche, so the Colorado Avalanche version of our show, and it kind of rolls into another question we have. So his question was, what is the strength of the draft in the area of the Arizona's too late first, which you kind of just touched on, but with the picks that the Coyotes do have and where they will have it with the 3rd pick, the 27th, and then either 31 or 32. So we'll focus on 27 and 31 and 32. What can the Coyotes accomplish in that area, do you think? And, what do you think they'll be targeting in that area?
Yeah, I think it's tough to say, in those late stages, what they're targeting is just basically, I think it'll have to be the best player that's available on their board as opposed to going for positional need or anything like that. I think especially in the phase that the Coyotes are in right now, it's all about asset building, and it doesn't matter what positions they play. It doesn't matter, where they're at. You have to get the best value you can, and there's going to be value in those ranges. And I think, one of the great things that the Coyotes have right now, and I've said it many times on here, is the scouting investment that has been made by the Coyotes is that will pay off in those late first round picks, because that is where they are going to they can't screw up number 3. You're going to pick. You could pick any player. It's not. I just don't think you're going to screw up number 3. And so you get that. That's fine. Okay. Most teams can make that pick. Not everybody will have the success at 3, but that's a great spot to be this year. Those late ones, it can go any which way. And so you really have to have a very strong feeling about your board. You have to stick to that board no matter what. And I think you also have to consider listening to other options, and or can you package those picks and move up enough to get a guy that you really love? Because say there could be a guy that's 5'6" on the Coyotes list that might still be there when they're picking later in the game, later in the first round. You never know. It's just you don't know, and especially this year, I don't think you know. But they have to continue to compile elite prospects as much as they possibly can as they continue kind of rebuilding or building again. And it's going to take time, but that patience is going to pay off eventually. And I think that by having Ryan Jankowski, Daryl Plandowski at the top of the pyramid of the scouting chart, those are guys that have often picked late in first rounds. They've had to pick those late guys, and they found value in those players. So we could talk about 60 different players that could be options for them at that range. But for them, I'm sure that they have it really honed into 3-4 guys that they hope are there and that they'll jump at when they get to the podium.
Let's talk position groups a little bit. We know a couple of the names of the top defensemen in this draft. Do any defensemen in this draft, again, this is a premium position we're talking about, and you're always looking for a guy there. Do any of the defensemen in this draft have star potential, or is it more like these guys will probably play in your top 4 if things pan out?
Yeah, I think there could be some real stars in there. I think if you find, I don't necessarily know one way or the other. I think Jiříček and Nemec are both on the cusp of star potential. I think they're top 4 guys all day. I think they've got great upside. You can ask a lot of different people and they will flip flop those 2 defensemen all the time, but they're very consistently the top 2 defensemen. However, I think in that next tier of defensemen that's available, there's a lot of intrigue and excitement, especially if you like offensive defensemen. You look at that next tier of defensemen, you've got Denton Matejchuk, you've got Kevin Korchinski, Pavel Mintyukov, a guy that is undersized, but I love him to death, Lane Hutson. He's one of my favorites in this class. I think he's got, he's been dogged for his size, and he would be, if he made it to the NHL at the size he is right now, he'd be the smallest defenseman in the NHL. So it's a huge leap, but that's a guy where I think he could be one of the stars from this class if he continues to grow and if he plays as dynamic as he is, because he makes plays that none of the other defensemen in this draft can make. And I've been watching him real closely for the last 2 years, and I am blown away by his dynamic capability. So that's another guy where late in that first round, maybe you could go after a guy like that if you're the Coyotes and say, wow, we got a star, because everybody else was hung up on size. But again, there's still risk in Lane Hutson. Just because I like him doesn't mean he's going to turn out to be a star. But just to quickly summarize, I mean, I think that there are guys that could really jump up over time. I don't see in this class, I don't see a Cale Makar or Adam Fox. So we're talking about pie in the sky kind of scenarios. But is there a guy like a Bowen? Could Šimon Nemec be like a Bowen Byram? And that's a really good young player, a Jamie Drysdale type guys that will be in your top 4. They might not be superstars by definition, but they're major impact players for your franchise for years to come.
Okay, and then let's just shift to goalies before we start asking you for your breakdown on some players. What's your sense of the goalies in the draft? Again, we just talked about this. The development path can be so long for a goalie. We've seen the recent trend of not taking goalies high unless you're absolutely sure. Is there any consensus at all on what this looks like for goaltenders, or is it just too damn hard to evaluate?
I think this year is probably the weakest goalie crop since I've been doing this.
Wow.
Tyler Brennan has great upside. A lot of talent. The numbers don't look amazing, but there is a lot there. I think he could go as early as the second round. I mean, there's not going to be a first rounder this year unless there's a team that really believes in any of those guys. And if they did, I'm sure I'll destroy them on draft day just because I just don't see it. And, I mentioned Leinonen. He's the top European. I think one of the best goalies in this draft is Hugo Havelid, who's 5'10". Most teams are not going to pick him. He's not going to be on a board for a vast majority of teams because he's not 6'2". But I think based on talent and based on everything I've seen from him, I think he's probably one of the best in the class. But I don't begrudge teams for not picking a 5'10" goalie, because there aren't many UC Saroses out there. And I don't know that he's necessarily. I loved UC Saros as a player, and I think he was much better than Havelid at the same age. So it's just kind of comes down to that preference. But I think teams are going to probably we could see a run on goalies in like the third or fourth round. I don't anticipate more than one or two going in the top 3 rounds of this draft.
Okay, we're going to now run some names by you, and this list is courtesy of Steve Peters, and literally just like a 30-second to 1 minute, your thoughts on each of these players. And I'm going to let Craig read the first name because I just know I'm going to get it wrong.
Yeah, good. Jonathan Lekkerimäki?
Yeah, Lekkerimäki, one of the better scorers in this draft. Really good hands. Offensively gifted, scored 7 goals in the SHL this season, which, he played split between the U20 and the pro side, led the under 18 world championship in scoring with 15 points. A guy that I think is looking more and more like a top 10 pick, top 12, probably. I couldn't see him going much further than that. But one of the best goal scorers in this draft for sure.
All right. Next on the list, we have Brad Lambert.
Polarizing prospect, only because we see all the tools are there. One of the best skaters in the draft, excellent hands. Did not produce very much this year. He's on his 3rd team in 3 years. He has not progressed at all over these last couple of years. In fact, I think he's gone backwards in some ways. Leads me to questions about his overall hockey sense and just some of the competitiveness. I think that his lack of consistency is incredibly concerning. But when you look at, if you just were to watch video of Brad Lambert, you would think he is the best player in this draft based on that toolkit. But when you really dig in and you look further, it just hasn't been there this year. And I have him pretty low on my board relative to where I think he'll actually go in the draft.
Okay. Next up, we have, is it Frank Nazar or Nazar?
Nazar.
US. Mm-hmm. Okay. Frank Nazar, the center.
Yeah. Very quick, shifty. I think he's got star potential. He's not the biggest guy, so that's really one of the drawbacks, but he was a top 2 center for the NTDP this year. Really good release on his shot. He gets into the inside well, highly competitive. One of the most exciting players in this draft. He probably averaged a breakaway or 2 breakaways per game this year. He certainly had one in every game I watched him. Every game, 1 breakaway at least. In the games that I watch live, and then also, on video, you're like, why does this keep happening? It's because he's sneaky and fast.
How about Isaac Howard? Let's switch to him.
Yeah, one of my favorites overall. He's one of the smaller forwards that will be taken in the first round, but he is also probably one of the most dynamic skill-wise. His hands are incredible. He's got great creativity. He makes a lot of plays under pressure. Competes well enough. I think he's the size is definitely a drawback. It seems to affect him more than it affects like a guy like Nazar, who's able to have that shiftiness. Good enough skater, not elite, but certainly a good enough skater and a guy that I really enjoy watching. He was the leading scorer for the under 18 team this year in total points, and one of the top 10 all time at the NTDP in career scoring. So that's a pretty impressive resume for him.
All right, let's do the 2 defensemen we just talked about back-to-back, David Jiříček and then Šimon Nemec.
Yeah. Jiříček is highly mobile, 6'3" right shot defenseman, brilliant shot, really moves pucks well. I think he's the better defender of the 2. Physically strong, missed half the season because of a knee injury at the World Juniors right before it got canceled. Missed 3 months, but came back and was able to make Czech's senior team and help them win a bronze medal. He didn't play down the stretch because they got NHL reinforcements. Great player. Šimon Nemec, probably the best puck moving defenseman of all of them. He had big time points. Great postseason for Nitra in the Slovakia League. They made it all the way to the final. He was a big part of that. Averaged nearly a point per game in the playoffs. He's not as big as Jiříček, but he's got some good shiftiness. His skating is of a similar quality. Very cerebral in how he moves the puck. I think that defensively he's going to continue to need work, but definitely a good offensive toolkit.
This draft has some great names, and one of them is Rutger McGroarty. Is that how you say it?
Yep,
that's a great name. What are your thoughts on him?
just a high character, high effort, gritty individual who ends up having really good hands for a player that, he's not a towering forward, but he's a guy he comes in at about 6'1", and he just feels like he's bigger. A lot of his goals come from near the net. A lot, he's a guy that I think you can win with. The big drawback for him is the skating is not strong. It's not, he has powerful skating, but he's not very fast. And so he's going to need to improve that to make a significant impact. But he can score from distance and he can score from in tight, and he has a great work ethic. He was the captain of the U.S. team at the World Under 18s this year. I think, definitely a guy I've got very high expectations for.
How about Nathan Gaucher?
He's interesting because I think he's going to be one of those guys that's going to be available at the tail end of that first round there. He's a decent skater. I don't think it's not necessarily the biggest strength. He's physically strong. He's big. He's hard to play against. He's got goal scoring ability. I worry that his hands are not there for him to be anything more than a depth center at the next level. But he's got a lot of physical tools and just a really good brain for the game, I think. And I like his effort level as well. So he's an interesting overall player and a guy that very well could be there for the Coyotes late in the first round. Okay. And last but not least on our list for today is Jack Hughes, not to be confused with Jack Hughes. Yeah. Jack Hughes, 2.0, played at Northeastern. His dad is now the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens. And I give him tweet of the night from the draft lottery because Kent Hughes said that he would not be taking his son first overall, and Jack tweeted big mistake. Love that from him. I'll just take a little extra second to explain about him because coming into into last season, he was viewed as maybe the best 2003 born player among Americans. Had so much skill, big numbers as a U17 year. He gets hurt. He misses a ton of the season. Came back and was not at all effective at the Under-18 World Championship. USA gets bounced in the quarterfinals, and it really reset the whole thing. Then he goes to Northeastern this year, doesn't necessarily produce at a level that you'd expect from a guy that's going to go in the first round. I think he'll probably slip into the second. I think he's probably going to be a higher second-round pick because he's such a crafty, skilled player, not very big, not very strong, but that will continue to progress for him as he kind of gets going. And I think he'll have a big season this year at Northeastern, which will make whoever drafts him feel a lot better about it because I do think there's quite a bit of skill and hockey sense there from him.
Would that be a hard thing for the Canadiens to do? I can't even remember if the Canadiens have a second-round pick, but if they do, like high in the second round, would that be a hard thing to do? We saw the Coyotes select Josh Doan, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's certainly not. I think at least in the second round, if you're picking him in the second round, it makes sense. It's not like it's like so off the board. Kent Hughes does still have to go home and look his son in the eye at some point, right? And I think that Jack Hughes, if he's available to them, and he's the best player left, then you take him. And it really isn't. It wouldn't be the dumbest decision because I think there's a lot of upside there from him. But yeah, that would be that'd be an uncomfortable conversation to have. But there have been plenty of instances over the years where GM didn't draft his son, or he got drafted before they could take him. But we've seen that a little bit more in these last few years, where there's been some familial ties to players.
All right, the last thing we have to ask you before we let you go, and of course we're going to put you on the spot here. You've already answered this question once for us, but I'm just curious if your thinking has changed at all. When number 3 rolls around, which name are the Arizona Coyotes going to call?
One of Wright, Slafkovsky, or Cooley. I mean, I think, in all likelihood, Logan Cooley is going to be there at 3. And if he is, run, don't walk.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And nobody else jumps into that top 3 in your opinion, not those.
I mean, there is certainly a chance that the defensemen are in there. I could not in a million years pass up the potential of those forwards for either one of the defensemen. And it's possible. The other thing I should say, Cutter Gaucher absolutely in that mix. He's got some of the best upside in this draft. He is, if he's going to be a center long term, that's a big body at center. He's one of the most sure-handed players in this draft. There is a case for him. I wouldn't pick him over Logan Cooley. I've watched them both side by side for too long to feel any differently, but I can totally understand why Cutter Gaucher has really risen up the charts. And I would be shocked if he's lasts any longer than 6th overall in this draft. And if you would have asked me that like 3 months ago, I've said no way, that he'd probably be, top 10. But now, having watched him over the course of the season and seeing his progression, I would not begrudge a team that takes him a little bit higher. But for me, if Cooley is there at 3rd, it is the easiest decision that you can make. You go up there, you get him, and now you've got a guy that could be a superstar player for you down the line.
Well, you've certainly give Coyotes fans a lot to be excited about no matter what happens in the draft. Chris, thank you so much for joining us once again, for taking time during what I can imagine is a busy time of year for you. So we appreciate it so much.
Hey, my pleasure. This is always fun. You guys do a great job, and always happy to talk to the Coyotes fans for sure.
Thanks, you so much, Chris.
See you next week, right?
Yeah, sure. I'll be back.
All right,
Thank you,
thanks.
Chris.
You gonna be in Montreal, by the way?
Maybe.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Yeah,
well,
it's not a sure thing yet, so we'll see.
Okay. All right, bud. Thanks as always. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much to Chris Peters, NHL Draft and Prospects Analyst. You can follow him on Twitter at Chris M. Peters. A lot of great insight. And, like all the draft experts that we've talked to on our show, he's out there watching the players. So that's what makes his insight so valuable. So thank you to Chris for joining us once again.
Yeah.
The other Peters.
Yeah, and the other Peters, by the way, was here chirping me for not putting on my glasses.
But Craig, the best part was when he did it, I saw you reading the comment and you were squinting at the comment, and I was trying not to lose it. It was so
I have the show run. All of our show notes are in like huge type, so I could read them without my glasses. But
perfect.
Chirping me, I can ignore those things.
Perfect. Well, Craig, I think today is the first time in months that there hasn't been NHL hockey on TV. Which is unfortunate, but fortunate, I guess, for the Colorado Avalanche. The Tampa Ranger series is tied at 2, but the NBA playoffs are going on as well. So, even though there's a day without hockey, you can still bet on basketball or literally anything else on the DraftKings Sportsbook app. It's a great time to download with all the sports going on. Baseball, of course, is happening 1,000 times a day. It feels like at all times of day. I've always been fascinated by that. So be sure to download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use the promo code PHNX, make any $5 bet during the NBA Finals, and get $150 in free bets instantly. That's promo code PHNX only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. And something you couldn't bet on, but if you could have, it would have been electric, is yesterday the PHNX crew was out at the IceDen in Scottsdale for a game of Broomball. Have you ever played Broomball, Craig?
I have played Broomball, and I find it interesting, and I know Petey's on this chat right now, for some reason not live with us, but he's on the chat. I find it interesting that when the game of Broomball was held up at the IceDen, where Petey and I have spent a lot of time, they did it when the 2 former hockey players were out of town. Just saying. Might have had a different result. Might have had a different result in spite of our age.
I will say, I wish you both were there. We did our staff meeting in the like video room, and there was a whiteboard, and I was like, if PD was here, he could draw up plays. It would have been amazing for you to be there, but we did get to be there. It was a great time. And I will say, I was the first overall pick in the entire PHNX draft because I'm Canadian, and love hockey. And I was on Team Espo, and Sean, producer Sean, was the first star of the game. We defeated Team Saul 4-3 in a buzzer beater in overtime, which was just the next goal wins. Sean, why don't you hop in and tell the people about your performance in Broomball yesterday?
Yeah, I was. I don't know if the former hockey players would have made much of a difference. I was born for this, you could say. I have a little bit of Broomball experience. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Like I said, I had a little bit of Broomball experience before, so that definitely carried me to my first 1-star performance. But I was the 3rd overall pick, so a little bit more excitement for Coyotes fans. Sometimes the 3rd overall pick is the best overall pick.
And what did you have? 2 goals and 1 assist?
2 goals and an assist. I had 2 goals and an assist, including the game-winning goal. So, I just, like I said, sometimes the 3rd overall pick is the best one.
I love it. I love tying that you just tied that in. We didn't even mean to do that.
Were there any fights?
No, but Saul did check Emma into the boards at one point, so that was a little concern.
He put an elbow into my back at one point too, but
I gotta say, I'm hurting today. Like, I have so much more respect for hockey players now. I'm hurting. It was a blast.
It was
thank you to the IceDen, and also it's just such a great activity to get inside in the cool air when it's 105 out and it's only going to get hotter. So I would let everybody, if you're listening and you live in the greater Phoenix area, check out the IceDen. 2-hour summer public skate sessions are only $10 per skater. So just visit icedenchandler.com/public skating to get some more information on that. A great activity when you're bored in your house looking to get moving, but not be sweating in 110 degrees.
And of course, the IceDen is going to be the practice facility of the Coyotes again, as it should have been all along. It was a state of the art, maybe the best practice facility when it opened. The Coyotes are going back where they should be, and they'll be practicing at the IceDen. It's a great facility. It really is. In my opinion, it's the best of the lot in the Valley.
Absolutely. It was a great time. So everyone check it out this summer. Any final notes from anyone? We'll just let Sean close out with us. Any final notes? Did you want to say anything about the game last night, Craig?
Well, I'm kind of glad that the series is going a little longer. I was wondering with that long layoff if Tampa needed a little time to get its sea legs, and it feels like that. I wonder, as this series goes along, if the Rangers are just going to start feeling their fatigue more and more. They just haven't had much rest. Tampa has had plenty of it. Tampa has the experience, but the Rangers have been really good at MSG. So we'll see how this plays out. Game 5 to me is a huge game in this series. We'll see how it plays out.
Very true.
One other thing, though, and I should prime you guys for this. The reason I've had a lot of people ask me if I'm going to reprise No Canada now that the Edmonton Oilers have been eliminated from the playoffs and a Canadian team will not win the cup for a 29th straight season. You know what we need? We need background music. We need the instrumental version of O Canada. So I'll get Sean on that. And at some point soon, you'll get a new version of No Canada.
All right. You heard it here first, everyone. That will be coming soon, just like Petey's Dance will be coming eventually. And I will be eating maple syrup eventually as well. I promise you, we have not forgotten. Thank you to the Members Only Discord for always holding me accountable. Speaking of the Members Only Discord, if you want to join the Members Only Discord, you can do so by becoming a member of PHNX at gophnx.com. Becoming a member gets you access to all of the amazing written and video content at gophnx.com. You get weekly deals on merchandise and access to that Members Only Discord. So become a member. Starting tomorrow, we're going to have exclusive video content dropping on gophnx.com, talking to former Coyote first-round draft picks, and we will reveal who will be tomorrow, either later today or tomorrow. I haven't decided yet, but just get excited. A lot of exciting announcements coming this week, so you'll want to keep tabs on PHNX Sports on Twitter and Instagram. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming, including Craig has a fun story coming out for the guide to Tempe and Scottsdale for visiting beat writers and visitors, right, Craig?
Yeah. Fans, visitors, sure. All of them. We'll look at restaurants, bars. Bars, that's an interesting topic. Something else that might be coming out soon. Anyway, I won't say anything more than that. We'll let y'all go, but we'll be back at this with an audio pod on Thursday.
Yep, audio episode tomorrow. So be sure to like, subscribe, and follow and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back live on the PHNX Sports YouTube channel, 11 a.m. on Friday. And follow us on Twitter at PHNX_Coyotes. As always, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you again to Chris Peters. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone.